you have clicked on this video, chances are something's going on with one of your plants that you suspect might be fungal, bacterial, or root rot related, but you're not quite sure how to go about diagnosing it or treating it. These kind of issues can be surprisingly difficult to pin down, and there is a very good reason why you don't see more videos on this subject. Sometimes things, for example, might appear to be fungal at first, but actually be caused by a whole host of other things. So today I am going to take you through exactly what is fungal, what is bacterial, and what might be caused by something completely different, and show you how to treat them. But first, if you're new here, hi, my name's Claire and this is Yuli. I make videos all about houseplant care, sharing tips and tricks I've learned over the years to help keep your plants happy and healthy. And I really hope this helps to make things a bit more understandable for you and allows you to confidently treat your plant afterwards. So without further ado, let's get into it. So, in order to be able to accurately diagnose and treat the issues going on in your houseplants, it is really important to get to the root cause, pardon the pun, of what is going on with them. So just to start with, before I take you through the very clear examples of what is and isn't fungal, bacterial, etc., I've brought across 3 plants, as I say, in my own collection that are presenting in a way of perhaps having those issues, but in fact, it's not linked to that at all. So the first one is this alocasia. This is the Alocasia sinuata, and if you just look at the leaves, you can see it's got some leaves that are a bit like brown in the middle with a yellow kind of halo around them, and that a lot of the time is what people think of when they hear fungal, and it absolutely can be. But if you have a little look closer, I've had a very careful inspection of this plant and I can see that this actually is pest related. This is actually thrips, and I don't know how well you'll be able to tell from your side, but I can see underneath there's little teeny tiny specks of black, which I do believe is just kind of excrement from the thrips. Pretty gross, I know. But yeah, this is pest related, presenting as something fungal. So I have isolated this plant. Regardless of whether something's fungal or not, I would always recommend isolating the plant if you're not quite sure. I will just go ahead now and chop those affected leaves, give the plant a spray down in the shower. And then for me, I personally like to use biological pest control. That is how I will proceed with this plant in order to get it back on track. But like I say, this isn't anything to worry about other than pests. And then this next one, another alocasia. This is the Alocasia heterophylla, commonly known as the dragon's breath. And if you look at this leaf here, this is another thing that you might think of as potentially being bacterial, for example. It's got that kind of wet look to its leaves, and it's got some dry, crispy bits just here. But again, I've had this plant for over a year at this point, and I know this plant quite well. I've got quite a good idea of how this plant cycles. And alocasia, quite often, if it's not growing in optimum conditions, or perhaps we're in the darker months and it's not getting as much light as it needs, it can actually cycle its growth. As it gets ready to give you a new leaf, which this one is here, it can just start to let go of the old growth that it doesn't have the energy to support anymore. And that is exactly what's happening here. This leaf is just slowly starting to yellow and die back. I would have thought probably within the next week this leaf will go completely yellow, and then I'll just take the leaf off. You can chop it sooner if you want to. Personally, I will just wait for nature to do its thing. But like I say, I know that this is the pattern of the plant and nothing out of the ordinary for this plant in my environment. So therefore, I'm not concerned about it being fungal or bacterial. And then lastly, the Anthurium crystallinum. This one here, if you look at this big leaf, just at the bottom, you might be able to see it's got some kind of dry patches, and it's got one there in the middle as well, that again have a bit of a yellow halo around them. And if you were to just look at this without knowing the plant at all, you might again jump right in and say, oh my goodness, that's clearly fungal. And I can tell you, because again, I know the watering patterns of this plant, I know what it likes, what it doesn't like. I can tell you that this is environmental, and this is down to me. I actually went away for 10 days a couple of months ago and I didn't water this plant for 10 days. I got back and I didn't water the plant for probably another 15 days. So this one went almost a month without a water, and that's when this started happening. It's literally just a sign of neglect in this plant. Now that I have watered the plant and it's back on track, the symptoms of that haven't spread at all. If it was continuing to spread and get any worse, I would do further investigation. But the fact that it is remaining very stable, it's more of just an aesthetic issue at this point. I could chop that part of the leaf back if I wanted to, but it doesn't bother me that much. So it is staying put. But now let's move on to some of the things. We're going to start with fungal first. Let's move on to some of the things that actually are fungal. And I've put together a little presentation to try and explain this better because, as I say, it can be confused with other symptoms and signs of other things in houseplants and therefore can be a little bit difficult to understand without visual representations. But the easiest way to try and understand fungal things in a nutshell is that they are typically dry, dusty, and crispy. And if you have a look at this leaf here, you can see the brown patches in the middle, very similar to the anthurium that I just showed you, are very, very dry, and they have got that yellow halo around them again. You might also notice, as we look at the pictures that I'm putting in the video here, but also the examples that I just showed you, a lot of the time in houseplants, anthuriums and alocasias are two types that are very commonly affected, but also are two types of plants that can show issues of other things. So we will come on to that. So yeah, you've got the brown, dry, crispy spots, you've got the yellow halo. And what you might notice with fungal issues is that they're not always super fast to kick in. They can happen over a good few weeks. They're not super fast to spread. Sometimes with houseplants, you'll see something start happening and you'll check back the next day and you'll be like, oh my goodness, it's 10 times worse. A lot of the time with fungal things, they can be much more gradual. But also just looking at these leaf spots here, you'll notice they're usually quite defined and they're often quite circular as well. Not always, but they do usually have like not a very blurry edge, quite a distinct sharp edge to them, which, as I say, is often outlined with this yellow halo. And then there's also a type of fungal disease that's known as rust, which is this here, and it's kind of coppery red usually, and again, not always, but is often accompanied by a kind of whitish dust when you touch it. Sometimes you can't actually see that on the leaf itself, but if you brush it with your finger and then look at your finger, you can see that there is some white dust there. I'm going to say it again, wash your hands. Always, bacterial or fungal, always make sure to thoroughly wash your hands before touching a potentially infected plant because it can spread very easily. But rust doesn't always have this yellow halo as we've just seen before. It can just be lots and lots of little kind of reddish brown dots. And I just want to address something as well, which is absolutely not fungal, but can often be confused with rust. And that's something called edema, which basically just happens when a plant essentially takes up more water than it can process, than it can transpire. And that essentially can cause cells in your plants to burst. And it can look like, I'll put some pictures on the screen so you can see exactly what it looks like. But as I say, it's nothing to do with fungal or bacterial things. It's usually just a sign that you can lay off the watering a little bit and maybe keep an eye on the roots to make sure it doesn't lead to anything like root rot. But then another fungal issue that isn't spoken about quite so much, but is powdery mildew. And this looks very white, often very fluffy. And often when you wipe it away, you'll notice that within a few days it will start to come back. And that is so typical of something fungal. But a lot of the time, this is actually confused with mealybugs. I get some of you guys sending me photos of your plants over on Patreon and stuff like that. And quite a few times before, I've had pictures of someone actually sent me something a couple of weeks ago of a jade plant that was covered in this white fluffy stuff, and they were asking, is this powdery mildew? And I took one look at it and I was like, no, that is absolutely mealybugs, because mealybugs can present in a very similar way. So I would just recommend getting a damp cloth or something and just doing a little bit of investigating, because powdery mildew, as I say, is very dusty. You'll often notice little clouds coming off the plant as you touch it, and there should be no little bugs. I'll put a clip on the screen so you can see what a mealybug looks like, but there shouldn't be any sign of anything else. It should just literally be a white powder. But again, although this presents quite differently to the other fungal issues we've looked at, again, you might notice this also falls into the dry and dusty category. And there's quite a few reasons that fungal diseases can occur. A lot of the time it can just be that there is a damaged part of your leaf and fungal spores get in that way, but also very damp, very moist conditions, very warm conditions. Lack of airflow is a massive, massive, massive one that I have found in my collection when I've encountered fungal things before. And airflow, particularly when you have got high levels of humidity, which you most likely do if you're growing lots of tropical plants, is a really important thing to take into consideration. I always say either make sure you're opening your doors and windows regularly and allowing air to kind of pass through. Think about running fans and not allowing your plants to become too crowded and cramped together. A lot of the time, even just little pockets of humidity building up and leaves pressing against each other can lead to fungal issues. This is also one of the reasons why I say with velvet leaf plants particularly, misting is often not a particularly good idea, just because if you don't have fantastic airflow, moisture buildup on the leaves can lead to areas where fungal spores are more likely to enter from. This is also particularly important when we get onto bacterial things, but we will come to that in a moment. But going back to the first fungal example, so the dark kind of crispy centers with the typically yellow halo around the outside, this is where it can get a little bit confusing because sometimes the signs in overwatering as well as underwatering, as I showed you in my own anthurium, can present very similarly to fungal issues. The bottom line is that overwatering is something that you do. It is a care mistake, and fungal issues are essentially a pathogen. So overwatering can eventually lead to fungal problems, i.e. root rot, but they're not exactly the same thing. If you do suspect that you might have overwatered your plant, or perhaps been consistently overwatering your plant, or maybe just haven't given your plant good enough drainage or something like that, and this is starting to happen to the leaves, chances are root rot is present and the issue has become fungal. So at this point, obviously just treating the foliage is going to do absolutely nothing. You're going to have to go right into the root system of the plant, and I've got a very good example of this that we will come on to shortly, but that is why I say it's really important to get to the root cause of the issue and not just what is showing on the foliage, because a lot of the time issues on the foliage are the first signs you will see of something going wrong in a plant. But here I've got an example of something which has started to turn fungal in one of my plants, and from a first look you actually might not be able to see, and I think I have caught this early, but this is my Alocasia scalprum, and as you can see there's just some yellow dots starting to appear here, which I would say probably in the next couple of days will have that brown centre that also starts to accompany with fungal stuff. And this is one that I'm growing in semi-hydro, and when I lifted it out to have a look at the roots, I can see that all of those roots at the bottom have started to go very sludgy and rotten. So that is something that I'm going to be dealing with. I'm going to show you how to treat fungal issues right from the base and hopefully set that plant up for success moving forward. So as I say, I will be showing you how to treat both the root rot aspect and the foliage fungal aspect later in this video. But also it is very important to understand the difference between fungal and bacterial. And bacterial is something that I think gets overlooked a little bit in houseplants. So if we go back to the slideshow, so we've just spoken about how fungal issues in houseplants are often very dry, dusty and crispy. Bacterial is completely the opposite, and the characteristics of something bacterial are typically wet, greasy and water soaked, almost looking like the tissue's collapsing instead of drying out. And again, compared to fungal issues, these can spread very, very quickly. I have seen bacterial issues spread on a plant literally within days, and I've got an example actually that I will show you in just a moment that has happened to with one of my plants. But also, and this is something I haven't personally experienced, or maybe I haven't just sniffed my plants that much, but it can apparently be quite smelly as well. So yeah, it's kind of gooey, it's wet, it's greasy. It often just kind of looks like something has been splashed on your plants, and it's perhaps not as defined compared to something like fungal. You know, when I spoke about fungal before, I said that often it's got quite a distinctive edge, it can be quite circular. Although bacterial can also be circular, it almost just kind of looks like it's bleeding in the tissue of your plants. It's not kind of sharp on its edges, it's more watery. And again, one of the most common causes for bacterial issues is poor airflow and water on the leaves, very similar to the causes of fungal issues, but this isn't caused by fungal spores. It can, however, be spread very easily, particularly between tools. So for example, if you cut a plant, if you chop a plant's leaf off and then you go and chop another plant's leaf off, that is a very, very common way to spread bacteria between one plant and another. And the plants that I have brought over to show you an example of when it comes to bacterial things, actually the leaf came off as I was picking the plant up. This is my Alocasia Mellow, and I'll put a picture on the screen of what this plant looks like literally a couple of days ago, and you'll be able to tell just how quickly this has spread. Like I say, it's like the tissue of the plant has literally collapsed, and I can see just from where I've pulled the leaf off the main stem, it is really quite sludgy. And I was going to say I am wiping my hands between every plant here, but I thought this was also an interesting example to bring over and show you, because this Anthurium it's not completely clear as to whether or not this is fungal or bacterial, and I think this is where people can get a little bit confused. But again, I think through careful monitoring of your plants, you can understand it better, and I am 99% certain that this is bacterial. This started literally a couple of days ago with this plant, and initially it looked very, very wet. And although it has kind of dried out to be a little bit brown and crispy at the bottom, can you see that it almost still looks kind of watermarky? It's quite blurry, it's not very distinct. In fact, you can see it quite well on this leaf here. It's almost like something has just dripped onto the plant's leaf, and that has kind of spread through the tissue. So I am, as I say, very sure that this is bacterial, and I am going to be treating it as such. So yeah, I am going to set up and I'm going to show you, we'll start with fungal. I'll show you how I treat the root rots, the fungal on the foliage, and then we will move on to the bacterial. Right, so we're going to start with this Alocasia that has both root rot and is starting to develop fungal leaf spots too. Root rot itself doesn't directly turn into foliar fungal spots, but the same conditions that cause root rot, things like excess moisture, poor airflow, and a stressed, weakened plant, make the plant far more vulnerable to fungal infections on the leaves as well. So it's very common to see both problems happening at the same time, and it's a reason why you're often made aware of root issues by what's happening on the foliage. So as you can see, I'm just removing all of the shriveled, sludgy, rotten roots. Fortunately in this case, there are still some salvageable, healthy roots remaining, but that's not always the case. Even if you have to remove the roots completely, the most important thing is to get all of the rot gone and prevent it from spreading further. Once you've got as much of the rotting roots off as possible, there are a couple of options as to what you can do next. I'm going to use a 3% hydrogen peroxide soak. I mix it with water in a roughly 3:1 ratio and let my plant soak in that for around 10 minutes. If you don't have any hydrogen peroxide, simply leaving the roots of your plant exposed to the air for a short time will help any cut ends to callus, slowing fungal regrowth and having a similar effect to the hydrogen peroxide. For roots of a similar thickness to these, I'd leave them out for about 15 minutes. I'm sterilising my scissors, tools and potting mat as I go with isopropyl alcohol to make sure nothing spreads. So when it comes to treating the fungal leaf spots, if the leaf isn't badly impacted, you can just cut around them as I'm doing here with this leaf as an example. In my case though, I decided to chop the whole leaf back, simply to ensure I eradicate the spread before it has a chance to get any worse. If you choose to keep the foliage and chop around the damage, I'd recommend spraying your plant down with a fungicide afterwards. I'll link some that I like in the description box below, but again, if you don't have any to hand, you can actually make your own using water and baking soda. Simply mix a small drop of dish soap with warm water and 1 teaspoonful of baking soda and use this as a foliar spray wherever necessary. Coming back to my leafless plant though, I decided to pot it up in sphagnum moss to aid root aeration. I also used a transparent container so I could monitor the roots well and make sure the rot doesn't come back. But now, moving on to the bacterial issues and starting with this anthurium, the leaf spots aren't too severe in this case and are currently only impacting a couple of leaves. Because of how fast bacterial problems can spread, I'm choosing to chop back the affected leaves instead of simply cutting around the leaf spots. Annoyingly, there isn't a bactericide you can buy for plants in the same way as fungicides, so the most important thing you can do besides ensuring all the affected tissue is removed is isolate the plant away from other plants for as long as possible. Ensure that its conditions are optimised going forward, so besides the correct lighting, heat and humidity, depending on the type of plant, good airflow and minimal moisture on the leaves is top priority. With a more severe case, such as this little alocasia, not only did I remove all the foliage and affected tissue, I also gave the entire plant a 30-second soak in water and hydrogen peroxide in a 4:1 ratio. Again, I then used a transparent container alongside sphagnum moss to provide an airy environment for the roots as the plant grows stronger. So yeah, I really hope that that's helped to make things a little bit more understandable and given you a better idea of what you need to do now in order to resolve the issues going on in your plants. If you have got any questions or anything that I haven't covered in this video, please do feel free to drop me a comment down below. I will do my best to help. But if you did find this video useful, please make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, have a lovely day, and I will see you in the next video.
Stay sexy, plant lovers.